She had exactly 3 seconds to make a choice that would either get her killed or change the entire Chicago underworld forever. 3. The folded napkin trembled between Grace Anderson's fingers. The ink had already bled through the thick paper, spreading like a wound. She could still turn around, walk back to the kitchen, climb out that greasy window above the dumpsters, and never look back. 2. The man at table 4 was not just a customer. He was Dominic Salvatore, the kind of name that made grown men check their rearview mirrors at red lights. The kind of man who owned half the city, but pretended he only ran shipping yards. And the woman holding his hand, she was not looking at him with love. She was looking at the clock. 1. Grace's sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the hushed atmosphere of the Sapphire Room, where Chicago's elite came to cut deals in dim lighting and expensive silence. She moved toward table 4 with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned that being seen meant being vulnerable. When you are a waitress, you are invisible. People say things in front of you that they would never whisper in a confessional. But tonight, the secret was not an affair or a stock tip or a political scandal. It was an execution, and the shooters were already at the back door. The choice hung in the air like smoke. Grace took another step forward, the napkin pressed against her palm so hard she could feel her heartbeat pulsing against the paper. She thought about her mother's hospital bed 3 years ago, the beeping machines and the smell of antiseptic, and the moment she realized she was completely alone in the world. She thought about the $47,000 in medical debt that had made her drop out of college 6 credits away from a psychology degree. She thought about 5 years of carrying trays and biting her tongue and being furniture in expensive suits. She thought about last Tuesday, when Dominic Salvatore had left her a $300 tip on a $50 check because he noticed she was limping from a double shift. "Get new shoes," he had said, looking her directly in the eye, not a command, a kindness. That moment of recognition, of being seen after years of invisibility, had planted something in Grace that she had not even known was there. A seed of loyalty, of debt, of something she could not quite name but felt in her chest like a stone. The Sapphire Room always smelled of truffle oil, expensive cologne, and fear. It was the kind of place where the lighting stayed dim enough to hide the sins of the city's most powerful men. Grace had worked here long enough to recognize the different flavors of that fear. The nervous energy of men about to make illegal deals. The quiet panic of politicians meeting their mistresses. The cold calculation of predators circling prey. But tonight felt different. Tonight the fear had teeth. Grace adjusted her apron, the stiff black fabric digging into her waist. It was Tuesday, usually a slow night, but table 4 was occupied. It was always occupied when he came in. You did not need to read the newspapers to know who Dominic Salvatore was. You just had to look at him. He did not carry himself like a thug or a gangster from the movies. He moved with the lethal grace of an apex predator who had long ago forgotten what it felt like to be hunted. The kind of stillness that came from absolute confidence. The kind of quiet that made loud men shut their mouths. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Grace's entire year of rent, tailored perfectly to hide the gun everyone knew he carried. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, giving him the look of a man who had aged into his power rather than stumbled into it. His hands, resting on the white tablecloth, were surprisingly elegant. Piano player hands, Grace had always thought. Not the scarred knuckles you would expect. But it was his eyes that marked him as dangerous. Dark and assessing, they missed nothing. Grace had seen him clock every entrance and exit in a room within seconds of walking in. Had watched him identify undercover cops by the way they held their forks. Had noticed how other customers unconsciously gave him space, like animals sensing a wolf. Sitting across from him was Vanessa Price. She was new. Dominic went through women like he went through scotch, quickly and without much aftertaste. But Vanessa seemed different. She was a model, or maybe an influencer, the kind of woman who looked like she was permanently under a ring light. Blonde hair cascading in perfect waves, diamonds glittering at her throat like drops of captured starlight. Her dress probably cost more than Grace made in 3 months. To anyone else in the restaurant, they looked like a power couple on a date. The beautiful trophy and the dangerous man, a story as old as Chicago itself. But Grace Anderson had been waiting tables at the Sapphire Room for 5 years. She knew the rhythm of a date. She knew the rhythm of an argument. She knew the rhythm of lust and boredom and desperate negotiation. And she knew the rhythm of betrayal. "More wine, sir?" Grace's voice was steady, carefully modulated to the exact tone of helpful invisibility. Being unseen was her superpower. Waitresses were part of the furniture. You learned early that the less memorable you were, the better your tips and the safer your shifts. Leave the bottle. Dominic's voice was a low rumble, like a luxury car idling at a stoplight. He did not look at her. His dark eyes were fixed on Vanessa, studying her with an intensity that would have made a lesser woman crumble under the weight of it. Grace placed the bottle of Barolo on the table, a vintage that cost more than her weekly paycheck. Her eyes instinctively flickered to Vanessa as she set it down, and that was when she saw it. The woman's hand was trembling. Not an obvious shake, just a micro tremor, barely hitting the stem of her wineglass. The kind of thing you would only notice if you had spent 5 years studying the small tells of nervous rich people. Grace had learned to read body language the way some people read tarot cards. A scratched wrist meant cocaine in the bathroom. Checking phones every 30 seconds meant an affair. Trembling hands meant fear. But it was not just the trembling. Vanessa's eyes kept darting to the heavy velvet curtains that covered the front entrance. Then to her phone, which sat face down on the white tablecloth like a sleeping snake. Then back to the curtains. A pattern, a rhythm. Grace stepped back, fading into the shadows near the service station, where coffee cups and water pitchers waited in neat rows. She watched. Vanessa picked up her phone. She did not unlock it. She just tapped the screen to check the time. 8:14. 10 seconds passed. Grace counted them in her head, a habit from years of timing courses and managing table rotations. Vanessa checked again. 8:14. The same time, she had not been checking the time. She had been checking if a message had arrived. "You are distracted tonight, Tesoro." Dominic took a sip of his wine, his gaze never leaving Vanessa's face. The Italian endearment sounded almost affectionate, but Grace heard the edge underneath it. The question hidden inside the observation. "Is the risotto not to your liking?" "No, it is perfect," Vanessa stammered, offering a smile that did not reach her terrified eyes. Grace saw the performance for what it was. The smile was a mask, and behind it was something desperate and cornered. "I just have a headache. The lights are a bit bright." The sapphire room was practically dark. The kind of atmospheric lighting that made everyone look 10 years younger and hid a multitude of sins. If Vanessa thought it was bright in here, she had never actually looked at her surroundings. She was seeing something else, something in her head. Grace felt a cold prickle at the base of her neck, the kind of sensation that came right before a migraine or a car accident, a warning from some primal part of her brain that still remembered when humans were prey. She walked toward the kitchen to grab a water pitcher, her movements automatic and practiced. But as she passed table 4 again, Vanessa's phone lit up. The screen was facing up now. Face up when it had been face down 30 seconds ago. Grace had 20/20 vision. It was one of the reasons she was so good at her job. She could read license plates from across a parking lot, could spot a fraudulent credit card signature from 10 feet away. The text message on Vanessa's screen was short, brutal, and crystal clear. "Sender unknown. Packages secure. Exit through kitchen in 5. Clear the line." Grace froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for her brain to process the words and translate them into their brutal simplicity. Clear the line. That meant get out of the way. That meant move so the bullets have a clear path. That meant in 5 minutes, someone was going to start shooting. And Vanessa Price needed to not be standing next to Dominic Salvatore when it happened. Grace pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The noise hit her like a physical wall. Chefs shouting in Spanish and English, pans sizzling, the industrial dishwasher rumbling like distant thunder, the familiar chaos of dinner service. But something was wrong here too. The back door, usually propped open for the smokers and the deliveries, was shut tight, closed and locked, the deadbolt thrown. In 5 years, Grace had never seen that door closed during service. It was a fire hazard, a health code violation. And standing next to it, phone in hand, was Tyler Brooks. He had started 3 days ago, new dishwasher, young, maybe 22 or 23, good-looking in that generic way that made him forgettable. Brown hair, average height, the kind of face you would struggle to describe to a police sketch artist. But he was not washing dishes. He was standing by the locked door, texting furiously, his thumb moving over the screen with practiced speed. And when Grace entered, his eyes snapped up to meet hers. Not the casual glance of a coworker, not the embarrassed look of someone caught slacking off. His eyes were hard, assessing, scanning her face like he was running facial recognition software in his head. He was not a dishwasher. He was a guard. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs hard enough that she wondered if he could hear it across the kitchen. The realization came together in her mind like puzzle pieces clicking into place. It was a setup, a pincer movement, shooters coming in through the front, where Vanessa would make sure Dominic was looking the wrong way. Shooters coming in through the back, where Tyler would make sure no one could escape. And everyone in the crossfire would be collateral damage, including her. Grace grabbed the water pitcher from the shelf, her hands shaking despite her best efforts to control them. The cold glass felt slippery in her grip. She could feel Tyler watching her, calculating whether she had seen too much, whether she was a problem that needed solving. She had to get out. Right now. Slip into the changing room, climb out that small window that looked over the dumpster alley, and run. Keep running until Chicago was a memory and Grace Anderson was a ghost. She owed Dominic Salvatore nothing. He was a mobster, a criminal. Men like him died in restaurants exactly like this one every other Tuesday in Chicago history. The city was built on blood and concrete, and his blood was just another layer in the foundation. It was not her problem. It was not her war. But then she remembered the way he had looked at her last Tuesday. Really looked at her. Not through her the way most customers did, not past her like she was a piece of ambulatory furniture, but directly at her, seeing the limp she was trying to hide, seeing the exhaustion in her face, seeing her. Get new shoes, he had said, and there had been something in his voice, not pity, not charity, just recognition. One person acknowledging another person's struggle. In 5 years of serving the wealthy and powerful, that moment of simple human kindness stood out like a star in a cave. Grace looked through the porthole window in the kitchen door. Vanessa was standing up, smoothing her dress with hands that still trembled slightly. She was gathering her purse, preparing to leave the table. "I am just going to the ladies' room." Her voice carried through the door, bright and artificial. "Take your time." Dominic swirled his wine, utterly relaxed, utterly trusting. The most dangerous man in Chicago, sitting there like a duck in a barrel because he believed the pretty girl in diamonds when she said she needed to powder her nose. Vanessa was not going to the bathroom. She was clearing the blast radius. Once she was away from the table, out of the line of fire, the bullets would start flying. They would come fast and without warning, the way these things always did. Professional, efficient. And Dominic Salvatore would be dead before he even reached for the gun hidden under his tailored jacket. Grace looked at the napkin stack on the waiter station. Small white squares, thick and expensive, with the sapphire room embossed in silver script across the corner. She grabbed one, grabbed a pen from the cup next to the reservation book. Her hand hovered over the paper. If she did this, she was involved. If she did this, she was declaring a side in a war she did not understand. If she did this, she would never be invisible again. She would be seen, and being seen in this world meant becoming a target. If she did not do this, Dominic would be dead in 60 seconds. Grace scribbled fast. The ink bled slightly into the thick paper, spreading like blood into gauze. "Your girlfriend sold you out. They are in position." She folded the napkin. Once, twice. It looked like a piece of trash or maybe a coaster, something easily overlooked. She took a deep breath, her lungs feeling too small for the amount of air she needed. She smoothed her face into the practiced mask of the invisible waitress. The expression that said she was part of the scenery. Background noise. Unimportant. Grace walked back out onto the floor. Vanessa was halfway to the bathroom, walking briskly, her heels clicking against the marble in a staccato rhythm. She did not look back at Dominic, did not pause. A woman with a purpose and a timeline. Grace approached table 4. Dominic was looking at his phone now, scrolling with his thumb. Bored, waiting for his girlfriend to return so they could finish their expensive dinner and go back to whatever passed for normal in his world. "Check, sir?" Grace kept her voice steady, professional. The same tone she used 100 times a night. Dominic looked up, and there was irritation in his dark eyes. The kind of annoyance that came from being interrupted. "I did not ask for the check." "We are not finished. I think you will want this, sir." Grace's voice dropped to a whisper that barely cut through the ambient jazz music floating from the hidden speakers. She slid the folded napkin under his wineglass, pressing down on it for just a split second, long enough to make sure he noticed. "On the house." She locked eyes with him. Let him see past the invisible waitress mask for just a moment. Let him see the terror in her face, the way her pupils were dilated, the way her hands were shaking despite her best efforts. "Read it now." She mouthed the words without sound, her lips forming each syllable with desperate clarity. Dominic frowned. The irritation in his face shifted to confusion, and then, as he saw the genuine fear in Grace's eyes, to something sharper. Alertness. The predator recognizing that something in his environment had changed. He did not unfold the napkin immediately. That would have been obvious. Amateur. Instead, he covered it with his large hand in one fluid motion, sliding it off the table and into his lap where it disappeared from view. Unseen by the room, unseen by the cameras Grace knew were hidden in the crown molding. He looked down, his body language still casual. Still the bored date waiting for his girlfriend. But Grace saw the transformation happen in his face. It was instantaneous. The wealthy diner vanished. The predator returned. His jaw tightened, the muscles bunching beneath his skin. His shoulders shifted, squaring. His free hand moved slightly closer to his jacket, where the gun was hidden. He did not look at the bathroom where Vanessa had fled. He did not look at the kitchen. He looked at Grace. Where? One word. No breath wasted. No time for explanations. Kitchen door in front. Grace whispered, refilling his water glass with a hand that was surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline flooding her veins like ice water. The dishwasher is the inside man. Dominic nodded, a micro movement, barely perceptible. Then his voice came out low and completely devoid of emotion, the kind of calm that came right before violence. Get behind the bar, stay down. It was not a request. It was an order from a man used to being obeyed without question. Grace turned and walked toward the heavy mahogany bar that dominated the west wall of the restaurant. Her sneakers made no sound on the marble now. She felt like she was floating, like her body had disconnected from her brain and was operating on autopilot. As she moved, she saw Dominic stand up. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not run. He simply buttoned his suit jacket with practiced ease and picked up his steak knife from beside his plate. It was a serrated, heavy-handled piece of cutlery, the kind of knife that could cut through bone if you had enough force in the right angle. At that exact moment, the kitchen doors burst open. Tyler Brooks stepped out, and he was not a dishwasher anymore. He was holding a suppressed submachine gun, the kind of weapon that belonged in war zones, not fine dining establishments. The suppressor made the gun look longer, more alien, more final. Simultaneously, the heavy velvet curtains at the front entrance were ripped aside by two men in ski masks. Black tactical gear, military precision, the kind of coordination that came from training and rehearsal. Vanessa, standing by the bathroom hallway, screamed. It was a perfect scream, theatrical, meant to signal the start of the chaos, meant to make everyone look at her instead of at the guns. But Dominic Salvatore was not in his chair anymore. Before Tyler could raise the barrel of the submachine gun, before his finger could find the trigger, a wine bottle flew across the room. It spun through the air like a football, spiraling with impossible accuracy. It smashed into Tyler's face with a sickening crunch of glass and bone. The sound was wet and terrible, the kind of noise that would live in Grace's nightmares for years. Tyler staggered backward, his hands flying to his ruined face. The gun discharged, firing a burst into the ceiling. Plaster rained down like snow. Patrons screamed. Real screams this time, not Vanessa's performance piece. The sound of genuine terror. Rich men and women diving under tables, crawling toward exits, trampling each other in the ancient panic of prey animals recognizing predators. Grace vaulted over the bar, her training as a high school track athlete coming back despite the years. She landed hard on the rubber mats behind the counter, her knees taking the impact. She curled into a ball, hands over her head, making herself as small as possible. The front window shattered under a hail of gunfire. The expensive floor-to-ceiling glass that gave the Sapphire Room its elegant view of the Chicago skyline exploded inward. Shards cascaded across the dining room like a crystal waterfall. The sound was enormous, deafening, the kind of noise that seemed to come from inside your own skull. Grace pressed her hands harder against her ears, but it did not help. She could feel the gunfire in her chest, could feel it in her teeth. The pop, pop, pop of suppressed weapons, the shattering of expensive crystal and china, the screams of people who had never expected to be in danger, who had thought their money and status made them invincible. And then silence. Well, not silence, not really. There was groaning, crying, the sound of car alarms going off outside, the distant wail of sirens that were still too far away to matter. Grace waited. 5 seconds, 10. Every muscle in her body was locked tight, coiled like a spring. Her jaw ached from clenching. Her lungs burned from holding her breath. Waitress! The voice came from directly above her. She looked up. Dominic Salvatore was leaning over the bar. He had a cut on his cheekbone, bleeding sluggishly, the red stark against his olive skin. His expensive suit was dusted with drywall powder, making him look like a ghost. In his hand was a black pistol. Definitely not his steak knife. He must have taken it from one of the shooters. But what struck Grace most was his face. He looked calm, terrifyingly, impossibly calm, like he had just finished a business meeting instead of surviving an assassination attempt. You okay? Two words, simple, direct, like they were discussing the weather. Grace nodded. She could not speak. Her throat felt like it was full of sand. Good. Dominic reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. Thick, heavy. He tossed it onto the bar next to her head. It landed with a thud. Grace stared at it. There had to be $5,000 there. Maybe more. All hundreds. That is for the tip. Now get up. You cannot stay here. Why? Grace's voice came out as a croak. She pulled herself up on shaking legs, gripping the edge of the bar for support. Because Vanessa's not the only one who saw you talk to me. Dominic's eyes scanned the ruined restaurant. Bodies on the floor. Tyler and the two shooters from the front. All dead. Blood pooling on the expensive marble. Patrons huddled under tables, too terrified to move. You just saved my life, Grace. Which means you just ruined theirs. You are a loose end now. Grace froze, her hand still gripping the bar. The words hit her harder than the gunfire had. A loose end. The kind of thing that got tied up. Permanently. How do you know my name? Dominic almost smiled. It was a dark, dangerous expression. The kind of smile that sharks probably made right before they bit down. I know everything that happens in my city, except apparently who my girlfriend was sleeping with. He held out a hand. It was stained with blood, though Grace could not tell if it was his or someone else's. Come on, if you stay, the police will ask questions you cannot answer. And if the cops do not get you, the men who sent these amateurs will. Grace looked at her apron. Black fabric, white embroidered logo. The Sapphire Room. 5 years of her life. 5 years of invisibility and safety and careful anonymity. She looked at the shattered remains of the restaurant, at the bodies, at Tyler's ruined face, his dead eyes staring at nothing. She took Dominic's hand. His grip was warm and solid despite the blood. He pulled her over the bar with surprising gentleness, like she was something fragile, something worth protecting. Where are we going? To find out who bought the bullets, and you are going to help me. The alleyway behind the Sapphire Room was slick with rain and grease. The smell of garbage and wet concrete filled Grace's lungs as Dominic dragged her by the hand. He did not run. He moved with terrifying, efficient speed, each step purposeful and controlled. Her sneakers slapped against the wet pavement, the sound echoing off the brick walls. Her breath came in jagged gasps that turned to fog in the cold November air. My car. Dominic pointed to a matte black Audi RS7 parked illegally by a dumpster. The kind of car that costs more than most people's houses. Low and predatory, it looked like it was moving even when standing still. I cannot just leave. My bag, my ID, it is inside. If you go back inside, you are dead. Dominic opened the passenger door and physically pushed her into the seat. Not roughly, but with the kind of insistence that did not allow for argument. He did not slam the door. He pressed it shut until it clicked with the solid thunk of German engineering. Then he vaulted over the hood in one smooth motion, landing on the driver's side. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural growl of 600 horsepower. The kind of sound that you felt in your chest more than heard with your ears. Blue lights flashed at the mouth of the alley. Police. Finally, get down. It was not a suggestion. Grace curled into the footwell, making herself small. She felt the car surge backward, tires screeching against wet asphalt. Then a violent jolt as Dominic clipped a garbage can, metal screaming against paint. The car spun, a perfect 180-degree rotation. He did not take the main road. Instead, he tore through a chain-link fence, the metal screaming as it peeled away from the frame. They shot out onto a service road that ran parallel to the Chicago River, the black water reflecting the city lights like a mirror of another world. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the engine and Grace's ragged breathing. Dominic drove with one hand on the wheel, the other pressing a burner phone to his ear. It is me. The Sapphire is burned. Vanessa turned. The dishwasher was a plant. A pause. Grace could hear a low voice on the other end, but could not make out words. No, I am clear. I have a civilian. Another pause. Clean it up, Jax. Burn the logs. Make sure the cameras inside the restaurant malfunctioned. He hung up and tossed the phone into the back seat like it was garbage. Finally, he slowed down, merging onto the highway and blending in with the late-night traffic. Just another expensive car in a city full of them. You can sit up now. Grace pulled herself back into the seat. She was trembling. Full body shakes that she could not control. Her teeth chattered despite the heat pouring from the vents. Who is Jax? What does clean it up mean? Dominic glanced at her. The streetlights cast rhythmic shadows over his sharp features, making him look even more dangerous. The blood on his cheek had dried, leaving a dark smear. It means erasing you from the crime scene. Grace, if the police find your ID, they put you in the system. If you are in the system, the people who tried to kill me can find your address in 5 minutes. The casual way he said it made it worse somehow. Like this was normal. Like people got erased from crime scenes every day in his world. Who were they? Contractors? Mercenaries? But they were hired by someone who knows my schedule. Someone who knew I would be at table 4 tonight. Vanessa. Grace whispered the name like a curse. Vanessa was the bait. She does not have the brains to organize a hit like that. She was just the delivery system. Pretty packaging for a bomb. Dominic pulled the car off the highway, navigating toward the industrial district near the docks. The buildings here were skeletons of old Chicago. Brick factories that had not produced anything in decades. Rusted water towers. Broken windows like missing teeth. Where are we going? Safe house. My penthouse is compromised. My clubs are watched. This is the only place off the grid. He pulled into a nondescript warehouse garage. The heavy steel door rattled shut behind them, sealing them in darkness. Then overhead, halogen lights flickered on, harsh and white. The space was not a dungeon. It was a high-tech bunker disguised as a mechanic's shop. Monitors lined one wall, their screens dark but ready. A wall of weapons lined the other. Everything from handguns to rifles to things Grace did not even have names for. She stepped out of the car, her legs wobbling like a newborn calf. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. So this is it? I just live in a warehouse now? For tonight. Tomorrow we find out who signed the check for those bullets. Dominic stripped off his ruined suit jacket and tossed it on a workbench. Underneath, he wore a white dress shirt stained with drywall dust and blood that was definitely not his own. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and covered in ink. Tattoos that told stories Grace could not read. And you, he pointed a finger at her, are going to tell me exactly what you saw before you dropped that note. I told you. She checked her phone. Details, Grace. Dominic's voice had an edge now. Not angry, but intense. Focused. The devil is in the details. What color was the phone case? What hand did she use? Did she look at the door, the window, the waiter? Grace caught the water bottle he tossed her from a mini fridge. She cracked it open and drank, the cold liquid shocking against her dry throat. She closed her eyes, visualizing the moment. This was what she was good at. Observation, memory, the invisible waitress who saw everything. She checked the time twice. 8:14. Then the text came. She did not unlock it. The preview popped up. Sender unknown. Packages secure. Exit through kitchen in 5. Clear the line. Dominic stopped pacing. And the dishwasher. Tyler, he started 3 days ago. Always texting near the back door. I thought he was just lazy. Grace paused, a memory surfacing like something breaking through ice. Wait. Dominic froze. What? Yesterday, I saw him talking to a vendor, the guy who delivers the linens. But it was not our usual guy. It was a man in a gray suit. Tyler handed him something. A flash drive maybe, or a lighter. It was small, silver. Dominic's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. He walked over to the weapon wall and pulled down a tablet. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced speed, bringing up grainy photos of men with hard faces and dead eyes. The linen service is owned by the O'Malley family. The Irish. I thought we had a truce. We do. Or we did. Until tonight. He swiped through photos, each face meaner than the last. Was this the guy in the gray suit? Too old. Swipe. No, swipe. Another face. Younger. Handsome in a cruel way. Cold eyes that looked like frozen water. A scar near his right ear, thin and precise. Grace gasped. Him. That is him. The scar. Dominic went completely still. The air in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. When he spoke, his voice was terrifyingly soft, the kind of quiet that came right before an explosion. That is Kieran O'Malley, the exiled son. He is supposed to be in London. Why is he here? Dominic turned to her, his eyes blazing with something that was not quite anger and not quite fear. Something worse. To start a war. The safe house had a shower, thank God. Grace stood under scalding water for 20 minutes, trying to scrub the feeling of impending death off her skin. The water at her feet ran pink from someone else's blood that had splattered on her shoes. She did not remember when that had happened. Did not want to remember. When she came back out to the main room, wrapped in a towel with her hair dripping, she found clothes laid out on a metal bench. Oversized sweatpants and a t-shirt that smelled like expensive detergent and gun oil. She changed quickly, grateful to be out of her ruined uniform. Dominic was not alone anymore. A man was sitting on a crate, typing furiously on a laptop. He was huge, at least 6'5", with a shaved head and a beard that reached his chest. He wore a tactical vest over a hoodie, the kind of gear that made him look like he was going to war. Which Grace supposed he probably was. This had to be Jack's. Civilian is clean. I wiped the restaurant feeds, replaced them with a loop from last Tuesday. As far as the police know, the cameras were down for maintenance. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. He spoke without looking up from his laptop, his fingers never stopping their rapid-fire typing. And the bodies? Tyler and the two shooters are in the furnace at the scrapyard. No teeth, no prints. Jack said it casually, like he was discussing the weather, like he had not just confessed to destroying evidence and disposing of corpses. Grace felt her stomach lurch. He finally looked up at her. His eyes were surprisingly kind for a man who had just talked about furnaces and fingerprints. So this is the guardian angel. Grace crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly feeling very exposed despite being fully dressed. I am a waitress, not an angel. You saved the boss. That makes you a saint in this family. Or a target. Probably both. Kieran O'Malley, Dominic interrupted, his voice cutting through the warehouse like a blade. He was cleaning a semi-automatic pistol at the workbench, the pieces laid out with surgical precision. His movements were automatic, practiced, the kind of thing you could do in your sleep. Find me his location. Already on it, but Dominic, it does not add up. Jax turned back to his laptop, pulling up financial records that scrolled past too fast for Grace to read. Kieran does not have the cash flow to hire a hit squad like that. The gear they had was not street level. It was military grade. Suppressed weapons, tactical coordination, inside man planted 3 days in advance. That takes money and connections. Someone is funding him. Exactly. And that someone knows I would be at the Sapphire Room on a Tuesday night with Vanessa. Jax nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Vanessa, she is off the grid. Phone is dead. Apartment is empty. But he tapped on a key. A bank statement appeared on the big screen mounted on the wall. I tracked a payment to her offshore account 3 days ago. 200 grand. From who? Shell Company. Registered in the Caymans. But look at the routing number. Dominic leaned in, his eyes scanning the screen. Grace saw them widen slightly. The first crack in his composure since the shooting. That is not a bank routing number. That is a holding code. For what? Grace asked, stepping closer. She should not be looking at this. Should not be learning the inner workings of whatever criminal empire Dominic ran. But she could not help it. Could not look away. Real estate. High-end commercial real estate. Dominic turned to Jax. Cross-reference that code with recent property sales in the loop. Jax typed. Click, click, enter. A building popped up on the screen, sleek and modern, all glass and steel, the kind of building that housed law firms and investment banks. The Meridian Tower. Grace frowned, the name triggering something in her memory. She had heard it before. Recently. The Meridian. That is where Senator Caldwell had his fundraiser last month. Both men turned to look at her. We catered it. I was there. Dominic spun around completely, giving her his full attention. You catered an event at the Meridian? Yeah, for Senator Caldwell. It was huge, very high security, lots of important people. Senator Caldwell is on my payroll. Dominic's voice was flat, dangerous. Why would he be involved with Kieran? He was not the host. Grace said, her waitress memory kicking in. She remembered orders and faces, and who paid the bills the way some people remembered birthdays. The host was a man named Marcus Harrington. The silence that crashed into the room was absolute. Even Jack stopped typing, his hands frozen above the keyboard. Dominic looked at Grace like he was seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her, not as a waitress or a civilian or a loose end, but as something else. Something dangerous. Marcus Harrington is my business partner. We own the shipping yards together. Grace swallowed hard. Well, he was the one writing the checks that night, and I saw him talking to Vanessa in the hallway near the kitchen. I thought they were just flirting. But she looked scared. Dominic slammed his fist onto the metal workbench. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. Grace flinched. Marcus, that greedy bastard. He wants the yards for himself. Used Kieran as the muscle and Vanessa as the distraction. It is a coup. Jack stood up, his massive frame suddenly seeming even larger in the confined space. If Marcus is behind this, he has half the city's cops in his pocket. We cannot go to the police. We cannot even go to the families. Marcus will spin it that you went rogue, Dominic, that you started a war. Dominic paced the room, predator energy radiating off him in waves. Grace could practically see his mind working, calculating angles and odds and probabilities. He thinks I am dead. We have the element of surprise for exactly. He checked his watch, an expensive piece that had somehow survived the gunfight without a scratch. 4 hours? Until the morning news cycle does not report my body being found. What do we do? Grace asked. She wanted to go home, wanted to feed her cat, wanted to pretend this night had never happened. But looking at Dominic, seeing the raw intensity in his eyes, she realized something terrifying. She did not want to leave. She wanted to see him win. We crash a party, Dominic said, a cruel smile touching his lips, the kind of smile that promised violence and retribution. Marcus is hosting a gala tonight at the Museum of Art, some charity thing for his new acquisition. He thinks he is celebrating my death. We show up alive, it ruins his whole evening. We cannot get in there, Jax warned. Security will be tight. Facial recognition, metal detectors. They will be looking for you. They will be looking for Dominic Salvatore, the mobster. Dominic walked toward Grace, stopping inches from her. She could smell the gunpowder and expensive soap, could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. They will not be looking for a wealthy investor and his fiancée. Grace's breath hitched. His what? You need a makeover, Grace. Tonight you are not a waitress. Tonight you are the woman who is going to help me burn Marcus Harrington's empire to the ground. The word hung in the air between them. Fiancé, partner, accomplice. Grace thought about her apartment with the broken heater, thought about her empty bank account and her student loans and her dead-end job. Thought about 5 years of being invisible while rich people got richer and powerful people got more powerful and nothing ever changed. Thought about $300 for new shoes because a dangerous man had noticed she was in pain. She met Dominic's eyes and did not look away. Where do I sign up? The transformation took 2 hours. Jax surprisingly knew a guy who knew a guy. Within 30 minutes, a stylist arrived at the warehouse, blindfolded in the back of an unmarked van. Her name was Coco, a tiny woman in her 60s with silver hair and hands that moved like a surgeon's. She did not ask questions, just worked. Grace sat in a folding chair under harsh fluorescent lights while Coco circled her like a predator assessing prey. The woman's fingers lifted Grace's damp hair, examined her face from different angles, tutted at her bitten nails and calloused hands. You have good bone structure. We can work with this. It was not exactly a compliment. Grace watched in a cracked mirror propped against the warehouse wall as Coco went to work. The messy bun that Grace had worn for 5 years disappeared under skilled hands. Her brown hair, usually tied back and forgotten, was blown dry and transformed into sleek, dark waves that cascaded over her shoulders like water. Coco applied makeup with the precision of an artist working on a masterpiece. Foundation that made Grace's skin look porcelain. Eyeshadow that made her green eyes look dangerous instead of tired. Lipstick the color of dried blood. When Coco finally stepped back, Grace did not recognize the woman in the mirror. The dress came next. Midnight blue silk that clung to every curve Grace did not know she had. The fabric was cool against her skin, expensive in a way that made her afraid to move. A slit ran dangerously high up her left thigh, the kind of thing that would make walking a calculated risk. The sapphires came last, a necklace that felt cold and heavy against her throat, the stones catching the light like captured pieces of ocean. Matching earrings that brushed her jaw when she turned her head. Coco fastened them with practiced efficiency, then stepped back to admire her work. You will do, high praise apparently, in Coco's world. But the most dangerous thing was not the dress or the jewels or the expertly applied makeup. The most dangerous thing was the gun. Dominic handed it to her after Coco had been blindfolded and driven away. A Sig Sauer P238, small enough to hide, but deadly enough to matter. The metal was cold in Grace's hand, heavier than she expected. It goes on your inner thigh. The holster straps here and here. Dominic's voice was clinical, professional. He showed her how to secure the weapon, his hands quick and impersonal. Grace tried to ignore the fact that a man she had met 6 hours ago was now strapping a gun to her leg while she wore an evening gown. Safety is off, point and squeeze. Do not hesitate. If you hesitate, you are dead. He stepped back, studying her. Grace saw something flicker in his dark eyes. approval maybe, or concern. It was hard to tell with Dominic. His face gave away nothing he did not want it to. You clean up nice, Anderson. Grace looked down at herself. The waitress uniform was gone. The invisible woman had vanished. In her place stood someone else. Someone who looked like she belonged in the world of wealth and power and violence that Dominic inhabited. I do not feel like me. Good. Tonight you are not you. Tonight you are whoever we need you to be. They rode to the museum in a different car. A white Rolls-Royce Phantom that Jax had acquired from somewhere Grace did not want to think about. The interior smelled like leather and money, the kind of scent that probably cost more than Grace's annual salary. Dominic sat beside her in a tuxedo that made him look like he was going to the Oscars instead of a potential murder scene. His hair was slicked back, the silver at his temples somehow making him look more distinguished instead of older. The cut on his cheekbone had been covered with makeup, invisible now. He looked devastating. Like James Bond, if James Bond had actually killed people instead of just flirting with them. You are shaking. Dominic's voice cut through the silence. Grace looked down at her hands folded in her lap. He was right. They were trembling, fingers laced together so tight her knuckles had gone white. I am terrified. I carry trays, Dominic. I do not carry guns. I do not infiltrate galas. I do not help mobsters burn down empires. Tonight you do all those things. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, real. The first genuine human contact she had felt since this nightmare started. Marcus needs to believe I am oblivious. We walk in, we smile, we let him think he missed. While we distract him, Jax is going to hack into the server room in the basement and download the ledger. The proof that Marcus paid for the hit. And if he tries to kill you there, in front of 300 witnesses and the mayor, he will not. He is a businessman. He only kills in the dark where no one can see, where he can pretend his hands are clean. Dominic squeezed her hand and Grace felt something shift in her chest, a feeling she could not quite name but recognized from long ago, before her mother died, before the debt and the dropout and the 5 years of invisibility. Trust. Just stay by my side. If I say run, you run. You do not look back. You do not wait for me. I waited for you in the kitchen. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. Dominic looked at her, and for a second the hard mask slipped. There was something else there, something vulnerable. Gratitude, affection, maybe something more. I know. Do not make a habit of being a hero, Grace. The retirement plan sucks. The car stopped. The flash of cameras penetrated the tinted windows like lightning. Outside, Grace could see the red carpet, the crowd, the spectacle of Chicago's elite gathering to celebrate their own importance. Showtime. The doors opened. Grace stepped out onto the red carpet and the world exploded into light and sound. Camera flashes blinded her. Voices shouted questions that blurred together into incomprehensible noise. She felt Dominic's hand on the small of her back, possessive and steadying. Mr. Salvatore, Mr. Salvatore. Who is she? Is it true about the shooting at the Sapphire Room? Mr. Salvatore, are the rumors about a gang war accurate? Dominic ignored them all, guiding Grace forward with the kind of absolute confidence that made crowds part like the Red Sea. They swept past security, past metal detectors that beeped and were ignored because money talked louder than any alarm. Into the grand hall of the Chicago Institute of Art, it was breathtaking. Champagne towers that caught the light and scattered it like diamonds. A live orchestra playing something classical that Grace did not recognize but felt in her bones. The city's elite mingling under priceless paintings, their laughter echoing off marble floors and soaring ceilings. Old money and new money and blood money mixing together in expensive harmony. And there, standing at the center of it all, holding a glass of scotch like it was a trophy, was Marcus Harrington. He was a silver fox, handsome in that polished corporate way that came from expensive haircuts and personal trainers and dermatologists on speed dial. His tuxedo probably cost more than Grace's car. His smile looked like it had been practiced in a mirror until it achieved the perfect balance of warmth and insincerity. He was laughing at something the mayor said, his head thrown back in exaggerated amusement, playing the role of philanthropist, of patron of the arts, of upstanding citizen. Then he saw Dominic. The color drained from Marcus's face so fast it was almost comical. His glass tilted, amber liquid spilling onto his cuff, soaking into the expensive fabric. He looked like he had seen a ghost, which Grace supposed he had. Dominic leaned down to her ear, his breath warm against her skin. Smile, darling. He looks like he is about to have a heart attack. Grace smiled. It felt foreign on her face, this expression of calm amusement, while her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. They approached Marcus. The crowd parted for Dominic the way water parted for sharks. People recognized danger when they saw it, even dressed in a tuxedo. Marcus, Dominic's voice carried through the hall, smooth as silk and just as dangerous. Wonderful party. I almost did not make it. Had a bit of a service issue at dinner. Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Grace watched him pull himself together, the mask of composure sliding back into place. But his hands were shaking. She could see his fingers trembling around his glass. Dominic, I heard there was an incident. I am relieved you are safe. His eyes darted to Grace, scanning her face like he was trying to place her, trying to figure out if she was a threat or just another pretty face. And who is this charming guest? This is Grace. Dominic pulled her closer, his arm around her waist feeling both protective and possessive. My fiancée. The word landed like a bomb. Grace watched Marcus's face carefully, saw the micro-expressions flash across his features too fast for anyone else to catch. Surprise, confusion, fear. She extended her hand, channeling every bit of confidence she did not feel. A pleasure, Marcus. Dominic has told me so much about you, mostly about how much he trusts you. It was a blade wrapped in velvet, a threat disguised as a compliment. Marcus took her hand, his grip clammy and weak. He was sweating now, small beads forming at his hairline despite the perfectly controlled temperature of the museum. Fiancé, I did not know you were serious with anyone. After Vanessa was a mistake. Dominic's voice cut through Marcus's stammering like a knife through butter. His eyes bored into Marcus, dark and unforgiving. I found out she was disloyal. You know how I handle disloyalty, Marcus. Marcus tugged at his collar, the silk suddenly looking too tight around his throat. Yes, of course. Loyalty is everything. Exactly. Dominic's smile did not reach his eyes. Enjoy the party, Marcus. He steered Grace away toward the bar, leaving Marcus standing there looking like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine. Once they were out of earshot, Grace let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. He knows. He knows that we know. He suspects. Dominic corrected, accepting 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter. Now he is panicking. Watch him in the mirror. Grace glanced at the massive mirror behind the bar, its ornate frame reflecting the entire hall. She could see Marcus moving toward a side exit, his movements jerky and rushed. Not the smooth confidence of a man in control, the desperate scramble of someone whose plan had just fallen apart. He is moving. Good. Jax is in position downstairs. I need to intercept Marcus before he wipes the server. You stay here. Stay public. Stay safe. No. Grace grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his tuxedo. He is not going to the server. Look, she pointed discreetly. Marcus was not heading to the offices or the server room. He was signaling to someone. A waiter in a white jacket who nodded once and began moving toward the main power panel, concealed behind a decorative screen near the kitchen entrance. He is not fleeing, Grace realized with horror dawning in her chest. He is going to cut the lights. Dominic's hand moved toward his waistband, toward the gun Grace knew he had hidden there despite the metal detectors. If he cuts the lights, he is going to finish the job. Right here. Right now. Suddenly the orchestra stopped playing. The last notes of violin hung in the air like a question mark. Then a high-pitched feedback whine screeched through the speakers, so loud it made people wince and cover their ears. Grace understood with terrible clarity. The distraction. The signal. Get down, she screamed, shoving Dominic with all her strength. Years of carrying heavy trays had given her more muscle than people expected. He stumbled backward, just as the grand hall plunged into total pitch blackness. Absolute darkness. The kind that made you question if your eyes were even open. 3 muzzle flashes lit up the room from the balcony above. Bang, bang, bang. The champagne tower exploded in a cascade of glass and liquid. Screams erupted. The chaos was absolute and terrifying. Grace was on the floor, glass shards digging into her knees through the silk dress. The gun strapped to her thigh pressed against her skin, cold and real. She could not see anything. Could not tell which direction was safe. Grace, a hand grabbed her arm in the darkness, rough, strong, familiar. I have got you. Fire exit. Move. Now, Dominic's voice cut through the chaos like a lifeline. Grace scrambled to her feet, her heels skittering on marble and broken glass. She kicked them off, running barefoot as Dominic dragged her through the screaming crowd. The staccato burst of gunfire chased them. Pop, 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 professional, controlled. These were not amateurs firing wildly. These were trained killers making calculated shots. They burst through the emergency doors into the cold night air of the back alley. The temperature shock hit Grace like a slap. November in Chicago, freezing. Her breath came out in clouds of fog. Jax was there, the Rolls-Royce idling, passenger door already open. "Get in," his voice boomed across the alley. They dove into the back seat. Grace's dress tore as she scrambled inside, the silk ripping with a sound like tearing paper. Jax did not wait for the door to close before he peeled away, tires screaming against asphalt. As the car accelerated, Grace looked back at the museum. People were streaming out of every exit now, running in blind panic. She could see Marcus in the doorway, backlit by emergency lights, watching them escape. He missed. Dominic was checking himself for wounds, his hands patting down his chest and sides. He found blood on his shoulder, a graze that had torn through his tuxedo jacket. Not deep, but bleeding steadily. He missed again. He is crazy. He almost killed the mayor. He is desperate. Dominic ripped off his bow tie, using the fabric to apply pressure to his shoulder. And now I have the proof. He held up a small silver flash drive, no bigger than his thumb. Grace stared at it. "You pickpocketed him." When you shook his hand. Dominic smirked, though he was grimacing in pain. "Marcus always keeps his encryption keys on him. It is his security blanket." Thought he was so clever. He plugged the drive into the car's console. A screen lit up, displaying files. Lots of files. Grace could read some of the names even from the back seat. Red Wedding, Target Dominic Salvatore, payment schedule, wire transfer Moscow. Moscow? Jax's voice came from the front seat, sharp with surprise. The Russians? Dominic scrolled through the files, his face growing darker with each document. Marcus is not working alone. He sold Chicago to the Bratva. He looked at Grace, and the playfulness was completely gone now. This was the face of a man at war. "You cannot go back to your life, Grace. Not after tonight. They saw your face. You are in the game now. There is no exit." Grace looked at the gun still strapped to her thigh, looked at the blood on Dominic's shirt, thought about her empty apartment and her dead-end job and the invisibility she had worn like armor for so long. Thought about the last 6 hours, the note, the shooting, the escape, the gala, the way Dominic had held her hand in the car, the way he had said fiancé like it meant something. She met his eyes, her voice steady despite everything. "I am not going back. So how do we kill a Russian invasion?" The war room was a rusted trawler docked at an obscure pier on Lake Michigan. It smelled of diesel fuel and dead fish and old wood rotting from decades of water damage. Not exactly the Ritz, but it was off the grid, untraceable. The kind of place where digital surveillance died and old-fashioned paranoia kept you alive. Dominic sat at a metal table, the stolen flash drive plugged into a ruggedized laptop that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. His shoulder was bandaged now, white gauze stark against his bare skin. He had stripped down to just his dress pants, the ruined tuxedo shirt discarded on the floor. Grace tried not to stare at the scars that covered his torso. Bullet wounds, knife scars, burns. A roadmap of violence written on flesh. The Russians are not just invading. Dominic's voice was low and dangerous as he scrolled through the encrypted files. They are already here. Marcus is not just selling them territory. He is selling them the Port Authority codes. If they get those, they can move anything in and out of the Midwest. Drugs, weapons, people. Jax paced the small cabin, his massive frame making the space feel even more cramped. The transfer is scheduled for tonight. 2 in the morning at the rail yards. Marcus is meeting the Bratva lieutenant, some guy named Volkov. We hit them at the rail yards. Dominic decided, loading a fresh magazine into his pistol with practiced efficiency. We kill Volkov. We kill Marcus. We burn the codes. It is suicide, Jax said flatly. They will have 30 men. We have 2. He glanced at Grace, and a waitress. Grace stood up from where she had been sitting on a crate, still wearing the ruined blue silk gown. The torn hem dragged on the floor. The sapphires still glittered at her throat, incongruous in this place of rust and rot. I can get you close. Both men turned to look at her. The rail yards. The administrative building overlooks the switching tracks. They order late-night catering every Thursday for the graveyard shift managers. I know, because I used to pack those orders. So, Dominic asked, but there was interest in his eyes now. So the delivery van gets waved through the security gate without a check. It is routine, invisible. She paused, letting the word land. If we hijack that van, We drive right into the middle of their perimeter. Dominic studied her face. She could see him calculating odds, running scenarios, weighing risks. You are not driving the van. Jax drives. You stay here. If Jax drives, they will shoot him on sight. They know his face. He is your right hand. Grace stepped closer, meeting Dominic's eyes without flinching. They do not know me. I am just a girl in a uniform. No one sees the help. No. The word was final. Absolute. Grace felt anger flare in her chest, hot and bright. You said I was in the game. Let me play. She used his own words against him, throwing them back like weapons. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Finally, Dominic exhaled, a sharp, frustrated sound that seemed torn from somewhere deep. Jax, get her a bulletproof vest and find a delivery uniform. Grace felt something fierce and triumphant bloom in her chest. The game had changed. She was not a bystander anymore. Not invisible, not furniture. She was a player, and God help anyone who got in her way. The delivery van rattled over the potholes of the rail yard entrance at exactly 1:45 in the morning. Grace Anderson sat behind the wheel, wearing a greasy cap pulled low over her eyes and a stained apron over her bulletproof vest. The vest was heavy, ceramic plates pressing against her ribs with every breath. It felt like wearing a cage. In the back, hidden beneath trays of stale sandwiches and coffee urns that smelled like burnt cardboard, Dominic and Jax lay silent as corpses. She could not see them, could not hear them, but she felt their presence like a weight, like gravity pulling her forward into something she could not escape. Her hands were steady on the wheel. That surprised her. After everything that had happened in the last 12 hours, the shooting and the blood and the bodies, she thought her hands would shake, thought fear would make her sloppy. But her hands were rock solid. Maybe she was in shock. Or maybe something fundamental had changed in her during those 3 seconds at table 4. Maybe the invisible waitress had burned away in the muzzle flash of submachine guns, leaving behind someone harder, someone dangerous. ID, the guard at the gate, barely looked up from his phone. Young, bored, the kind of security that came from years of nothing ever happening. Grace held out a clipboard with forged paperwork that Jax had printed an hour ago. Late night drop for the foreman, roast beef and Swiss. Her voice was flat, tired. The voice of someone working the graveyard shift for minimum wage and hating every second of it. The guard glanced at the clipboard, then waved her through without really seeing her. Go ahead. Building C, just like that, they were inside. Grace drove through the maze of shipping containers, the van's headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The yard was bathed in eerie orange floodlights that turned everything the color of rust and old blood. Massive cranes loomed overhead like mechanical dinosaurs frozen mid-hunt. Train cars sat silent on tracks that stretched into the darkness like veins carrying poison through the city's body. She parked the van behind a stack of containers marked with Cyrillic letters. Russian. Of course, the invasion was not coming. It was already here. We are in, she whispered into the communications earpiece Jax had given her. The device felt foreign in her ear, a tiny piece of plastic and electronics that connected her to the two men in the back. Good girl. Dominic's voice came through warm and steady. Now stay in the van. Keep the engine running. If this goes sideways, you drive straight through that fence and do not stop until you hit the highway. Grace watched through the rearview mirror as the back doors opened silently. Dominic and Jax moved like shadows, slipping into the darkness between containers. They carried weapons that looked like they belonged in war zones. Rifles with suppressors and laser sights, pistols strapped to thighs, knives hidden in boots. They looked like death walking on two legs. Grace gripped the steering wheel and waited. Waiting was harder than moving. Waiting gave you time to think about all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways people could die, all the ways she could end up as another body in Jax's furnace, reduced to ash and forgotten. Her real phone buzzed, not the burner Dominic had given her, her actual phone, the one she thought she had turned off, the one that should not be getting messages because no one had this number except bill collectors and her landlord. Grace looked at the screen and felt her blood turn to ice. Text message. Senator Caldwell, I know you are in the van, Grace. Look to your left. Her hands, steady until now, started to shake. She turned her head slowly, like moving through honey. Like maybe if she moved slow enough, reality would change. On top of a shipping container 50 yards away stood a man in tactical gear. A sniper rifle was mounted on a bipod, the scope pointing down at the clearing between the train cars. The red laser sight was not pointed at her. It was pointed at Dominic. Grace's heart stopped. just seized up in her chest like an engine that had thrown a rod. Dominic, she screamed into the comms, her voice cracking with panic. It is a trap. Caldwell sold us out. Sniper left flank. But it was too late. A spotlight blazed to life from above, so bright it turned night into day. More floodlights snapped on from every direction, transforming the rail yard into a cage of light. Grace threw her arm over her eyes, the sudden brightness physically painful. Drop your weapons, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker, echoing off the metal containers. Grace blinked away the spots in her vision and saw Senator Caldwell standing on a catwalk above the trains, surrounded by armed mercenaries. At least 20 of them, maybe more, all pointing weapons down at the clearing where Dominic and Jack stood exposed in the open like fish in a barrel. Dozens of red laser dots danced on their chests, on their heads, on every vital organ that could spill blood and end a life. Did you really think I did not know about the van, Dominic? Marcus Harrington stepped out from behind the protection of a black SUV, his voice carrying across the yard with smug satisfaction. Caldwell tracks all the city cameras. We watched you steal it, watched you load it, watched you drive here like lambs to slaughter. Dominic did not drop his gun. He stood back to back with Jax, both men coiled tight as springs. Predators who knew they were surrounded but refused to show fear. Grace. Dominic's voice in her ear was eerily calm. Drive. Now. What? Drive away. This ends here. Get out while you can. I am not leaving you. The words tore from her throat, raw and desperate. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away furiously. If you stay, you die. Dominic's voice had an edge now, not fear. Command. Go. That is an order. Grace's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. She could see Dominic in the side view mirror, see him looking back at the van, looking at her, a silent goodbye in his dark eyes. She shifted the van into reverse. Her foot hovered over the gas pedal. Then she looked at the fuel tanker parked next to Marcus's limousine. Big, industrial. The kind that held thousands of gallons of diesel or gasoline or something equally flammable. The kind of thing that would explode if you hit it hard enough. Grace shifted into drive. Maya, no. Dominic's voice screamed in her ear, but she was already moving, already committed. The van's engine roared as she floored the accelerator, tires smoking against asphalt. She aimed the van like a missile, like a bullet fired from a gun, straight at the fuel tanker. The world slowed down. She could see Marcus's face, his expression shifting from smug triumph to confused terror. Could see the mercenaries starting to turn, to aim their weapons, but too slow, always too slow. At the last second, Grace threw open the driver's door and dove out. She tucked her body tight, the way she remembered from high school gymnastics a lifetime ago. Hit the gravel hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Rolled, kept rolling as momentum carried her away from the van. The collision was not loud. It was a dull, metallic crunch, almost disappointing. Then the world exploded. The fireball erupted with a roar that Grace felt in her bones. A wall of heat and pressure that picked her up and threw her like a doll. She hit the ground again, sliding across a gravel that tore at her skin through the thin uniform. The air was sucked from the rail yard, pulled into the hungry maw of the explosion, then expelled in a shockwave that shattered windows and bent metal. Grace lay curled behind the massive steel wheel of a train car, her body trembling uncontrollably. The heat was intense, pressing down on her like a physical weight. She could not breathe, could not think. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. She pushed herself up on shaking arms. The van was gone, consumed by the inferno. The tanker was a tower of flame, lighting up the night sky. Marcus's limousine was a twisted wreck, engulfed in fire. Bodies lay scattered across the clearing, some moving, some not. The floodlights had blown out. The catwalk where Caldwell had stood was empty, the metal twisted and buckled. The mercenaries were scattered, disoriented, their tactical advantage erased in one moment of insane courage or suicidal stupidity. Grace was not sure which. Gunfire erupted again, but it was sporadic now, confused. The mercenaries were shooting at shadows, at each other, at nothing. Grace searched the chaos with desperate eyes, looking for him, needing to see that he was alive. Movement near the edge of the blast zone, a figure crawling through the dust and debris. Not Dominic. Too big, too clumsy. Marcus Harrington. His pristine suit was scorched, his silver hair wild and singed. He was coughing violently, dragging himself toward a pistol that lay gleaming in the dirt a few feet away. He looked pathetic, a broken king in a ruined kingdom. But before his fingers could touch the weapon, A boot slammed down on his hand. Marcus screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pain and terror that cut through the roar of the fire. Grace watched, breath caught in her throat as Dominic stepped out of the smoke. He looked like a vengeful spirit rising from hell. His tactical shirt was torn, revealing skin smeared with soot and blood. He was limping, favoring his left leg, but his gun hand was steady as rock. He stood over Marcus, blocking out the light of the fire, casting a long shadow over the man who had been his brother. "You missed." Dominic's voice was not a shout. It was a low rumble that carried terrifying clarity despite the chaos. Marcus looked up, his face a mask of desperation. Tears streamed down his soot-stained cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the grime. "Dominic, please. You have to listen." It was Caldwell. "He forced me. The Russians, they have Elena. They threatened my daughter. I am your family." Dominic roared, the composure he had maintained finally cracking. "I was your brother, Marcus. We built this city together. And you sold me for a seat at a table that does not belong to you," Marcus sobbed, clutching his crushed hand to his chest. "I can fix it. We can fix it. Just let me." "There is no fixing a broken spine." Dominic raised his pistol, aiming directly at Marcus's heart. "Goodbye, Marcus." Bang! The gunshot cracked through the air. Grace flinched, closing her eyes. But when she opened them, Marcus was still alive, still cowering in the dirt. It was Dominic who stumbled, who jerked forward with a look of profound shock crossing his face. He clutched his side, dark blood instantly welling between his fingers. He swayed, his knees buckling. "Dominic!" Grace's scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. She scrambled out from her cover, ignoring the heat, ignoring the danger. All she could see was him falling. Behind Dominic, emerging from the thick black smoke like a nightmare-given flesh, was Alexei Volkov. The massive Russian lieutenant was burned. Half his face was red and blistering from the heat of the explosion. His expensive coat was gone. His shirt hung in charred rags. In his hand, he held a heavy, large-caliber revolver. Smoke drifted lazily from the barrel. Volkov laughed, a wet, hacking sound that came with blood. American melodrama. So boring. Always talking, never finishing. He cocked the hammer of the revolver for a second shot. Dominic was struggling to lift his gun, his arm trembling, his strength draining away with every second. He was completely open, completely vulnerable. Volkov leveled the gun at Dominic's head. "Das Vidania." Goodbye. Time stopped. Grace saw the glint of firelight on the revolver's barrel, saw Dominic's eyes close, accepting his fate, saw the Russian's finger tightening on the trigger. No. The word came from somewhere deep inside her. Not her own brain, not her fear. From some primal place that predated language and civilization. The place where mothers lifted cars off their children, where soldiers threw themselves on grenades, where ordinary people became capable of extraordinary violence. Grace scanned the ground, her eyes locked on a jagged piece of steel debris from the exploded van. About a foot long, razor sharp on one end where the metal had been torn and twisted by the blast. She grabbed it. The metal bit into her palm, cutting deep. She did not care. Grace ran. She ran with a speed she did not know she possessed. Ran with every ounce of strength left in her body. Ran toward the man who was about to kill the only person who had seen her in 5 years. Volkov heard her scream, turned. His eyes widened in surprise as he saw the girl in the torn delivery uniform charging him. He sneered, shifting his aim away from Dominic and toward her. "Stupid girl." He fired. The bullet tore past her, grazing her upper arm. It felt like a hot branding iron pressed against her skin, searing through fabric and flesh. Pain exploded in white, hot agony. But she did not stop, did not even slow. Grace collided with Volkov with the force of every single day she had been invisible. Every time she had been ignored or dismissed or looked through like she was furniture. All that rage and frustration and suppressed fury channeled into one moment of pure violence. She was half his size. But her momentum caught him off balance. As they crashed together, she raised the jagged steel shard with both hands. With a primal scream that echoed across the burning rail yard, she drove the metal downward. She aimed for the wrist in his body armor, right beneath the armpit where the straps connected. The place where flesh was soft and vital organs were close to the surface. She felt the sickening resistance of skin and muscle, felt the steel punch through, felt it sink deep into his body cavity. Volkov gasped. The sound was wet, horrible. His eyes went wide, filled with shock and confusion and the sudden, terrible understanding that he was dying. He looked at the piece of metal protruding from his body, then up at Grace's face, which was inches from his own, twisted in rage and terror and something wild. He dropped the revolver. His hands scrabbled uselessly at the shard, but his strength was already draining away like water from a cracked glass. He staggered backward. 1 step, 2 steps. The giant collapsed, falling onto his back in the dust. His eyes stared up at the smoke-filled sky, seeing nothing. Blood bubbled from his lips as he tried to speak. Failed. Died. Grace stood over him, her chest heaving. Her hands were covered in blood. His blood. Her blood. She could not tell anymore. She stared at the body, unable to comprehend what she had just done. She had killed a man. Not in self-defense from a distance. Not by accident. She had driven a piece of metal into his body and felt him die. Felt his life end beneath her hands. The silence that descended was suffocating. Grace. The voice was weak, barely a whisper. She spun around. Dominic was still on one knee, pressing his hand against the bleeding wound in his side. But he was not looking at Marcus, who had fainted from fear. Not looking at the dead Russian. He was looking at her. His dark eyes were wide, stripped of their usual guarded cynicism. There was no coldness there now, just awe. Pure, unadulterated awe. Grace ran to him, falling to her knees in the dirt. Her hands hovered over his wound, afraid to touch him, afraid to hurt him more. "You are hit. We need a doctor. We need to go." Dominic groaned, his face pale beneath the soot. But incredibly, he smiled. Not his usual smirk. Something soft, real. He reached up with a blood-stained hand and cupped her cheek. His thumb gently brushed away a smudge of ash, the gesture impossibly tender, given the circumstances. "I told you to drive away. I gave you an order." Tears spilled from Grace's eyes, cutting clean tracks through the dirt on her face. She laughed, a choked, hysterical sound. "I am terrible at taking orders. I am a really bad waitress. I always get the orders wrong." Dominic's thumb stroked her cheekbone. He pulled her forehead down to rest against his. "Then I guess I will have to give you a promotion." Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder. But for a moment in the center of the burning rail yard, neither of them moved. Grace's forehead pressed against Dominic's, his hand warm on her face, her tears falling onto his skin. For a moment there was no war, no bodies, no blood. Just two people who had seen each other when the rest of the world looked away. 6 months later, the Sapphire Room had reopened. If possible, it was even more intimidating than before. The velvet curtains were heavier, deeper blue, like the ocean at midnight. The lighting was dimmer, more intimate. The air smelled of triumph and truffles and the particular brand of fear that came from knowing you were in the presence of power. Table 4 was occupied. It was always occupied on Tuesday nights. Dominic Salvatore sat there, looking impeccable in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most cars. He looked healthier than he had in years, sharper. The only physical reminder of that night at the rail yards was a thin, jagged scar that disappeared into his hairline near his temple, a trophy of survival. He swirled a glass of sparkling water, not wine. Clarity over indulgence these days. His dark eyes scanned the room with practiced ease, cataloging every entrance and exit, every potential threat, every opportunity. The habit of a man who had survived because he never stopped being vigilant. A waiter approached the table, young, new, nervous. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the water, clutching the wine list like a shield against the intensity of the man at table 4. "Would you like to see the wine list, sir?" The words came out as a stammer. "No need." A woman's voice came from behind him, and the waiter jumped like he had been shocked. Grace Anderson slid into the booth across from Dominic. She was not wearing an apron. She was not fading into the background. She was not invisible anymore. She wore a structured white blazer that looked like armor made of silk. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, catching the dim light and throwing it back like captured stars. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders in dark waves. She looked like the kind of woman who owned buildings, who made decisions that affected lives, who could destroy you with a phone call. Technically, her name was on the deed. The 2018 Barolo. "And bring 2 glasses. I am celebrating." Her voice was cool, commanding, the voice of someone used to being obeyed without question. The waiter nodded frantically and scrambled away like his life depended on it, which in this restaurant it probably did. Dominic watched her, amusement dancing in his dark eyes. He reached across the table and took her hand. His thumb brushed over the platinum band on her finger. Not an engagement ring, something heavier, a symbol of partnership forged in blood and fire. What are we celebrating, Tesoro? Grace smiled. It was not the polite customer service smile she had worn for 5 years. It was dangerous, knowing. The smile of a woman who had driven a van into a fuel tanker and killed a man with her bare hands and come out the other side stronger. Just got a secured message from Jax. They found Senator Caldwell in Mexico. The accounts have been settled. Permanently. Dominic raised an eyebrow, genuinely impressed. You authorized a cleanup order on a senator without consulting me? Grace leaned back as the waiter returned with the wine. She watched the crimson liquid pour into the crystal glasses, catching the light like liquid rubies. I learned from the best. Besides, I did not want you to worry. You have a date tonight. Dominic laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made heads turn throughout the restaurant. People whispered. Grace could feel their eyes on them, feel the weight of their speculation and fear. That is him. That is her. The couple who burned down the rail yards, who survived when no one thought they would, who rebuilt an empire from ash and made it stronger. Dominic picked up his glass, raising it to her. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that still made her breath catch. To the waitress. His voice was soft, teasing. Grace clinked her glass against his, the sound clear as a bell in the hushed restaurant. To the boss. She corrected. They drank. The wine tasted like victory, like survival, like everything they had fought for and bled for and almost died for. Outside, the Chicago wind howled, cold and unforgiving, the kind of wind that cut through expensive coats and reminded you that winter was coming, that this city had teeth, that it chewed up the weak and spit them out. But inside at table 4, they were untouchable. Dominic's hand covered hers on the white tablecloth, his grip warm and solid and permanent. Grace looked around the room, saw the other diners, saw the waitstaff moving invisibly between tables. She caught her own reflection in the window, saw the woman she had become, not invisible anymore, not furniture, not background noise, a queen. She smiled. 1 week later, Moscow, Russia. The office was dark, lit only by the glow of a laptop screen. Dmitry Volkov sat in shadows watching video footage for the 3rd time. Security camera feed from the rail yards. Grainy, black and white, but clear enough. He watched the girl in the delivery uniform charge his brother. Watched her drive the steel shard into Alexei's body. Watched his brother, the strongest man he had ever known, fall and die in the dirt like a dog. Dmitry paused the video on her face, frozen in a moment of rage and terror, twisted into something primal and violent. Grace Anderson. He spoke the name like a prayer, like a curse, the invisible girl who killed my brother. He picked up his phone, made a call. The line connected after 2 rings. I want everything. Her past, her family, her weaknesses. I want to know what she eats for breakfast and who she loved before him. I want her life dissected and cataloged and delivered to me. A pause as the voice on the other end confirmed receipt of the order. And I want the Salvatore empire burned to ashes. Every business, every connection, every person who pledges loyalty to Dominic Salvatore, I want it all destroyed. He hung up, lit a cigar. The smoke curled up toward the ceiling like ghosts rising from graves. On the wall beside his desk was a corkboard covered in photos and documents. In the center, pinned with a red tack, was a picture taken at the museum gala. Grace in her midnight blue dress and Dominic in his tuxedo. They were smiling, playing their roles. Someone had drawn a red X over both their faces. Dmitry leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. You took my brother. I will take everything you love, he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. The war was just beginning. Back in Chicago, Grace's phone buzzed. Her real phone, not the burner. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. We know what you did. See you soon. Below the text was a photo. Alexei Volkov's dead body, the steel shard still protruding from his chest. Grace showed it to Dominic without a word. His jaw tightened as he read the message. Dmitry Volkov, Alexei's older brother. I was wondering when he would make his move. He looked at Grace, concern in his dark eyes. This is different. Dmitry is smarter, more patient. He will not come loud like his brother. He will dismantle us piece by piece. Grace deleted the text, put the phone down, picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip. Then we will dismantle him first. She met Dominic's eyes. Zero fear, all determination. I did not come this far to lose everything now. Dominic studied her face for a long moment. Then he smiled. That small, dangerous smile that promised violence and retribution. No, you did not. Outside, the city lights glittered like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Chicago, beautiful and brutal, a city built on blood and concrete and the bodies of people who thought they could control it. Grace Anderson had been invisible once, had served the powerful and asked for nothing but tips and the occasional kind word. Now she sat at table 4, not as a waitress, as a partner, as an equal. As someone who had looked into the abyss and instead of blinking, had jumped in and come out the other side covered in blood and smiling. The war with the Russians was coming. Dmitry Volkov was out there somewhere, planning his revenge, gathering his forces, sharpening his knives. But Grace was not afraid. She had been invisible her whole life, and invisible women saw everything. The game had changed, and Grace Anderson was playing to win.